Hi guys, and welcome to this new tutorial. In this one we're gonna get separately the questions and the answers. So, as we explained in the previous tutorial, these are gonna be respectively the input and the target of the neural network. That is, the questions will be the input and the answers will be the target. And so we're gonna get them separately before cleaning all of them, all the questions and all the answers. So that's the last step before starting all the cleaning process to make the dataset as simple as possible. All right, so let's do this. And before we start, well, it's important to understand where we're going to get separately these questions and these answers and how are we going to put them together. Because what we want to get is two separate huge lists, one for the questions and one for the answers, but of the same size. Because for each index I of these lists, well, the answer of index I should be the answer to the question of index I. Therefore, it should be well aligned. And to make sure this is well aligned, what we need to understand here is that in our conversations IDs huge list that we just made in the previous tutorial, well, in each conversation, the first element will be the question, the first question, the second element will be the answer. So basically, the key identifier of the answer is the next key identifier of the question just before. So that's what we need to make clear. And if that's the case, well, it will be easy for you to understand how we get these questions and answers. So let's do this. Since we're going to make two separate lists, one for the questions and one for the answers, we're going to introduce here two lists that we're going to initialize as empty lists. And of course, we're going to call them very simply questions and answers. And so as we just said, we are going to initialize them as empty list, which, like before, is with a pair of square brackets. All right, so our two lists are now initialized, and now we're going to make them with, of course, a for loop. So, for, and now according to you, on which object, on which list are we going to iterate on? Well, that's of course what I've just showed you, the conversations IDs. Because the conversation IDs not only contains all the conversations, but mostly it contains the key identifiers of each line of the conversation. So we will get the key identifiers in each conversation, and using our dictionary that we made before, we will get the text of the line. Because we no longer want to get the key now, we want to get the real text, because this will be the input and the targets of the neural network. So we want to get the real text, and therefore we have to use our dictionary to map the key identifiers to these texts. But to make sure we get well aligned by taking the answer as the next key identifier of the question, we need to use this conversation IDs list, because this is where we get the conversations. Therefore, we're going to iterate on this conversations IDs list. So let's do it. And therefore, we need to choose a name for the loop variable. We're going to call it, well, conversation. This is still a conversation, only it just contains the lines IDs. So for conversation in, as we said, conversations underscore IDs. All right, colon, and let's start the loop. Okay, so now according to you, and actually I recommend you to do that while doing the course, is to guess what I'm going to type. You know what we want to get. We want to get separately the questions and the answers. So try sometime to make pause on the tutorial and try to guess what I'm going to type next. So right now we want to get separately the questions and the answers. Then first we know that in conversations IDs, the key identifier of the answer comes right after the one of the question. And besides, we have this ID2line dictionary that can map these key identifiers to the real text of the questions and the answers. So we need to use them both. And therefore, what do we need to do? Well, not only we need to iterate again on each of these conversations, because right now we're dealing with a specific conversation in all the conversations IDs. So we need to iterate through all the key identifiers of this conversation. And then once it is done, we will map these key identifiers to the real text. And therefore, what we need to do now is a second for loop. We need to iterate on the key identifiers of the conversation we're dealing with right now. And therefore, the second for loop is going to be for I in range of Well, basically we need to put the number of elements of that conversation we're dealing with right now, and this we can get it with the length that we can get with the len function of this conversation we're dealing with right now. Len conversation. However, since we're also going to get the answer in this second loop, well, we're going to add here a -1, because we will take the index plus 1. We will take the I plus 1 here, and therefore it shouldn't go beyond the upper bound of the range. Therefore the -1 here. All right, so with this second loop, we iterate on all the elements of the conversations, that is all the key identifiers one after the other. And so colon again, and now let's enter this second loop. And the good news is that right now we are ready to get our questions and our answers. And of course, since we already initialized them as empty lists, well, we simply need to use the append function to append what we have to append in respectively the questions and the answers. So let's start with the questions. Questions.append. And now try to guess what we need to append exactly. Well, remember we want the text this time. We're getting closer and closer to the neural network, so we have to get the text someday. And so you know what to do. We need to use our dictionary, ID2line, because this is the one that maps these key identifiers that we're about to get to the text of the lines. And so here we go. Let's take our dictionary, ID2line, and in square brackets, we need to input the key identifier of the line, which is going to be, well, conversation of index I, because I is the loop variable that goes through all the elements of the conversation here, which is one of the conversation in the whole list of all the conversations. Perfect. So by doing this, we just appended a new question. And now we have to append the answer corresponding to that question. And therefore, well, let's maybe take this, copy, and paste it here because it's going to be almost the same. We're going to take care of the answers now. So I'm taking my answers list. And now it's going to be the same. We have to append the answer to the answers list, but remember that everything has to be aligned. At a specific index, the answer of that index should be the answer to the question of that same index. And as we just explained, the answer has the next index after the one of the question. This index corresponds to the index of this first element here, so that's 0, for example. And therefore, the index of the answer that we want to get, that we want to append now, and that should be aligned with our previous question, must be the next index, that is the index here, and therefore it should be I plus 1. And so the only thing that we need to replace here is just this I by I plus 1. And that's it. We just appended the proper answer to our previous question. So now we're going to have a look. We're going to check if everything's okay. We're going to be able to check that by checking the relevance of the questions and the answers. So let's do this. Let's execute now. And there we go, well executed. Now let's have a look at first the questions, yes, and the answers, yes. All right, and now let's check if our questions are well aligned with our answers. So let's take, for example, this one. How do you get your hair to look like that? That's the question, and the answer is Eber's deep conditioner every 2 days, and I never ever use a whatever. So that looks correct. Then let's take another example. I can see some French here. C'est ma tête. This is my head. So this is my head is the translation of c'est ma tête. And the answer is, so same index, 10, 10. Right, see, you're ready for the quiz. I suppose this is a French quiz. I don't recognize any movies in these lines, but it indeed looks like some movie lines. And anyway, we aligned correctly our questions and our answers. So congratulations, you're getting closer and closer to the right structure we're trying to get. And so now actually we can start cleaning all these texts, because as you can see, these will be difficult for the chatbot to train how to talk like a human, because we need to do a lot of cleaning. For example, I don't, we will replace that by I do not, so that all the don't, do not are associated with one same common token. And same for your, we're going to replace that by you are, and that is, Anyway, we're going to do a lot of cleaning like that, and we're going to put everything in lowercase as well, and that starts from the next tutorial. Until then, enjoy Deep NLP.